process, a mother of a disabled child more than 18 weeks, now being told an extra 25 weeks for mandatory reconsideration. What is the Minister doing to take steps to reduce delay in processing applications for pension credit and other state support to help lift households out of poverty?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, which she rightly puts to this House. We have increased the number of staff working on pension credit by over 500, and we're working very quickly to deal with those backlogs and delay, because, as she says, we need to get through those backlogs.
Lee Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 7, please.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Job centres work with a range of external providers to offer a wealth of outreach support. In Berkshire, this includes work coach support for customers with complex needs, delivered from Reading College, outreach delivered at the Slough Homeless Team and Windsor Homeless Project locations, and employment support delivered from the Probation Hub in Reading. Outreach work is something not only that we strongly support, but actively encourage.
Lee Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister names a number of projects within Berkshire, none of which fall within my own constituency of Newbury. So would the Minister welcome community interest companies like Lambourne Junction hosting the job centre in their facilities to make sure that communities in rural constituencies like myself have access to the job centre rather than having to travel into the main town centre for that support?
Minister.
I would very much welcome such an initiative being brought forward in his own constituency of Newbury. He may also be pleased to know that there is currently the potential of a youth hub opening from Newbury, similar to that is already grant funded and in operation in Oxford.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Question number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Due to the introduction of auto-enrolment, which is at least one policy which has cross-party support, introduced, legislated for by the last Labour government, taken forward by the coalition government, there has been a 92% increase in the number of employees saving into a workplace pension scheme since 2012, and that's over 10 million more people now saving for a pension who weren't saving previously.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be aware that around 10% of people automatically enrolled into workplace pension schemes choose to opt out, often due to low pay and cost of living pressures, leaving them losing out on not only building up their own contributions, but also on the top-ups of their employers. So would the Minister consider a simple tweak and allow for employers' contributions, which would have been due in any event, to continue in such opt-out circumstances?
I thank her for that question. It is indeed an interesting idea, and one that has been put forward recently by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and I will consider it. But I will say to her also, in the pension schemes bill, which we're introducing next year, low earners with multiple small pots will have those pots consolidated so that that money works better for them in the future and gives them a better retirement in the future too.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister very much for that answer. Minister, while both governments, one that's in opposition now and the government now, have always encouraged people to buy into pension contributions in every way they can, the fact is, for many people who are low earners, it's not possible to have a pension scheme at the same time to live in the age that we are with the cost of living. Minister, what can be done to encourage people to do that in a way that it doesn't impact upon the monies that they have coming in? Thanks so much.
Minister.
I thank him for that question. There are a number of ideas that think tanks and research institutes have put forward. One such idea is a sidecar savings account that could be used for a pension, but could have some money set aside for a rainy day should somebody fall into debt. So that is something that we're considering too. And he raises a very important question, because some of those on low incomes sometimes can't afford to put that contribution in. But might there be a way in between opting out and not remaining in the scheme? So that's something we're looking at. Thank you.
Tim Shannon.
The other one. my twin. We've never done back-to-back before. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 9, please.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once people are granted refugee status, they have immediate access to DWP employment support and services. Work coaches work with refugee customers to understand their individual employment needs and provide tailored support as appropriate, including with CV writing, interview preparedness and help securing work experience. Those who require more intensive support can be referred to DWP employment programmes or other contracted provision.
Jim Farrell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So the government is seeking to clear the very unacceptable backlog, huge backlog of asylum applications they inherited from the previous government, and as a result we are already beginning to see an increase in the numbers of newly recognised refugees who quite rightly now have the right to work and to contribute here. So could he say a little bit more about the strategic planning, cross-departmental work that is happening on providing tailored support? He talked about tailored support, but of course the existing scheme comes to an end in June. So can he say something more about that, so that refugees who've got every right to be here have got the ability to take a job, pay taxes and contribute to us?
Minister.
He is entirely correct, Mr. Speaker, to recognise the important role of refugees in contributing to our economy. What I would say to him is that there is a range of tailored support available, things such as language support, as I mentioned earlier, with CV writing, interview preparedness, but also with ensuring that their qualifications, perhaps earned elsewhere, are transferable in this country. But I would, of course, be very happy to meet with him to discuss further the support that could be put in place as we look, as he says, to clear the asylum backlogs. We are in constant communication with the Home Office and other departments to ensure a holistic approach in doing so.
Mary Wilson.
Question 10, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government keeps the rates of parental pay under review. Following the Secretary of State's announcement in a written ministerial statement to Parliament on the 30th of October and subject to parliamentary approval, parental pay will increase in line with the Consumer Prices Index at the rate of 1.7% from April 2025.
Mary Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At less than half the rate of a full-time national minimum wage, maternity and paternity pay is so low that most parents simply can't live on it, and they're often forced into debt or forced back to work sooner than they'd like. And a poll of fathers found that 2/3 of them would take more leave if paternity pay were higher. So if we really want to give families choice in how they care for their children in those precious early months, will the Minister discuss with colleagues in the Treasury and the Department for Business how we can boost rates of maternity and paternity pay?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I understand the point that the Honourable Lady is making, but of course requests for significant uplifting of benefits come with a price tag, and I heard no suggestions as to how that would be paid for. But what I would say is that in terms of the support for parents, the Government committed in its manifesto to review parental leave to ensure that it best supports working families, and further details of that review will be announced in due course.
Alistair Strathern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recent damning statistics highlighted that just 2% of parents made use of shared parental leave in the last year, with uptake skewed towards the highest earners. Given the real importance of breaking down barriers to equal parenting for employment, will the Minister make sure he works with the Department for Business and Trade as part of that upcoming review to ensure that enhanced parental leave is considered as part of that, including strengthening paternity leave entitlements?
My honourable friend is absolutely correct, not just to highlight the importance and the benefits of shared parental leave, but also the disparity between those who make use of it. I will, of course, maintain dialogue with the Department for Business and Trade as we go through that review, but I'd also very much welcome a discussion with him on his ambitions and ideas for how we could take that forward.
Obidine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 11.
Minister.
No assessment along the lines the honourable gentleman has asked about has been made. Benefit rates are reviewed each year, increasing by 6.7% last April and by 1.7% from next April, in line with inflation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answer. The bit I'd like to focus on in terms of the rates is the age differential. So you'll be aware that people on under 25 receive a different rate of universal credit. Now, the Government has announced that it's going to try to abolish that age differential when it comes to the national living wage. And this is something that would be really good for young care leavers if it was managed to abolish it for universal credit as well. So will the Minister be looking at potentially phasing out the age differential in universal credit too?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman makes an interesting suggestion. It's not something I'm looking at the moment, although, as you will have heard me say earlier, we are reviewing universal credit in the course of the next year or so. We certainly do want to support young care leavers. He'll know, in a rather different area, the announcement we've made recently about changes to carers allowance, so we are keeping all of these matters under review at the moment.
Chris Vince.
Number 12, Mr. Speaker.
Tuesday.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to answer questions 12 and 23 together. Our new youth guarantee will ensure every young person is earning or learning, tackling the scandal we inherited of almost 1 million young people not in education, employment or training. Young people in Harlow, Derby North and across the country deserve the opportunity to work, get skills and build a better life. And that's what this Labour government will deliver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency of Harlow, there's lots of fantastic organisations who provide transferable skills for young people. And I want to thank the honourable member for Basil and Billericay for reminding me of the name Jason Shaves, who is an incredible champion for this kind of work. Does the Minister agree with me that by giving local areas like Harlow the flexibility, the power and the funding to engage with young people in the way that best works for them will get them back into employment quicker?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. That's why we're going to give new powers, responsibilities and funding to local areas to deliver our youth guarantee. Because they know their communities best. They know the voluntary organisations, the schools, the training providers, the businesses and the mental health and other support that many young people need. So in Harlow, I know that approach will be the key to giving young people the opportunities he wants and that they deserve.
Catherine Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mel was out of work and homeless, but YMCA Derbyshire saw only her potential, not her disadvantage. Now she is at Toyota and on track for a leadership role. Their Working Assets programme has a 70% success rate in supporting homeless young people into employment. How will the Youth Guarantee help government join up with, enhance and champion local programmes like this?
That sounds like a fantastic programme by the YMCA in her constituency. And it is precisely this that we need to join up with what local colleges are doing, support provided by local councils, supported employment programmes run by the NHS, because if we join that up, base it on local needs, her young constituent and many others like her will get the chance they need and deserve to build a better life.
Jack Rankin.
Question number 13, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We want to reform the system to do a much better job in helping people to enter and stay in work. We'll be publishing a green paper next spring and we'll be discussing our proposals with disabled people.
Jack Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To protect those in need and to deliver for taxpayers, you need to take tough decisions. Reforming health and disability benefits will require the ministers to make difficult choices. But so far, the plans rely on reducing NHS waiting lists, which the OBR has said will hardly have any effect on economic activity. Are you willing to make unpopular decisions to solve this issue? And if so, when?
Minister.
Well, what I can assure the honourable gentleman is we will make the right decisions and they will be set out in our green paper in the spring. There is a need to reform the health and disability benefit system, there's no question about that, and we want to talk to disabled people themselves about the details in order we can make sure we get it right.
Liam Connell.
14, Mr. Speaker.
Sheriff State.
Disabled people and people with long-term health conditions deserve the same rights as everybody else, including the right to work. Many of the 2.8 million people out of work due to long-term sickness say they want to work if they can get the right help and support. And that's what our Get Britain Working Plan will deliver.
A core objective of the Get Britain Working White Paper is to support disabled people into employment. As the Minister will know, the Blue Badge scheme is an important provision in enabling people to get to work. But data released this month shows a sharp rise in Blue Badge theft, with badges being sold on by criminals for upwards of £500 to people who use them to avoid parking charges. Will the Minister back my campaign to tackle this injustice?
So State.
Yes. I think it is disgusting that some people think it's all right to steal the blue badges that so many disabled people rely on to work, but also socialise and see family and friends. I know my honourable friend, the Minister for the Future of Roads, who's responsible for this issue, is a strong supporter of his campaign, and I will contact her to stress my support and the support of my entire department too.
The Get Britain Working White Paper rightly says that people deserve the opportunity to thrive and that sport, arts and culture are crucial to achieving this goal, especially for those with disabilities. The Sovereign Centre in Eastbourne, where I learnt to swim, provides vital sports and leisure opportunities which will help serve the same, with the future of two of our pools there being considered. To best honour the aims of this white paper, does the Minister agree with me that Eastbourne Borough Council should engage with all interested providers who may be able to protect our fun and training pools at the Sovereign Centre before making any final decisions on the Centre's next steps?
The relevant question, as well as it should on Secretary of State. Do you want to answer it's up to you? I'm not quite sure it was relevant to the question.
Well, look, I really do believe sport and art and culture can play a huge role in engaging and inspiring people, helping them on the pathway to skills, confidence, jobs, and I want to see that provision enhanced in future. Because we're determined to have that at a national partnership level. I think it needs to happen locally too, to get people working and earning again.
Conor Nesbitt.
Question number 15, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our plan to get Britain working is crucial to tackling low pay and increasing living standards in every corner of the country. When only 1 in 6 people ever fully escape low pay, this party believes that's not good enough. So our new Jobs and Careers Service, backed by £55 million of additional funding next year, will kickstart our reforms to help more people get work and get on in their work so they boost their living standards too.
Conor Nesbitt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Average wages in my constituency of Crewe and Nantwich, a place with a proud industrial heritage, lag behind the regional and national averages at just £686 per week before tax. So can the Secretary of State outline how the Get Britain Working white paper will support growth as well as the high-skilled, well-paid jobs in my constituency, not just the biggest cities?
Secretary of State.
This government shares my honourable friend's determination to boost the living standards of his constituents. So the Get Britain Working white paper will ensure every local area, including in his constituency, produces its own Get Britain Working plan. Alongside our industrial strategy, our plan to make work pay, the National Wealth Fund and Skills England, this will help people get work, progress in their careers with good opportunities for employment right across the country.
Richard Holden.
Question number 16, please, Mr. Speaker.
Under the last Conservative government, an estimated 880,000 of the poorest pensioners eligible for pension credit were not claiming it. We have launched the biggest ever pension credit awareness campaign and also written to 120,000 pensioners on housing benefit, urging them to apply. As a result, claims for pension credit have more than doubled, and those who receive pension credit will also receive into fuel payments and other related benefits.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Before the last general election, the party opposite suggested that the removal of the winter fuel payment would mean 4,000 pensioners extra a year would die of freezing in poverty. How many will die under the government's proposals from this year?
Mr. Speaker, this government remains absolutely committed to supporting low-income pensioners. We're supporting them through the Household Support Fund, which local authorities can use to help people on the lowest incomes with their bills. The Minister for Energy and Consumers has also raised £500 million from energy suppliers to help those most vulnerable consumers in debt. And we've also got the Warm Homes Discount and the Warm Homes Plan to help those on low incomes to heat their homes.
You want to stand back?
Mr Speaker, under the Conservatives, billions in pension credit went unclaimed. The burden for driving up claims often lies in fantastic organisations such as Christians Against Poverty, the Falkirk and Clark's Carers Centre and Citizens Advice Falkirk and Denny, as well as the brilliant Falkirk Council Welfare Benefits team in my constituency. What assurance can the Minister give me that beyond the 21st of December that her department will work tirelessly to prevent billions in benefits being left unclaimed?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and indeed we have taken forward the biggest awareness campaign for claiming pension credit that has ever been seen, and we are absolutely determined that those on the lowest incomes should claim pension credit and be awarded pension credit, which will passport them to winter fuel payments and other related benefits.
Kirsty Blackman.
The Scottish Government is bringing back the winter fuel payment because we're aware of how much of an awful disaster this has been for the Labour Government. People are terrified to switch on their heating. Can she explain to pensioners, please, who are living in poverty circumstances but not eligible for pension credit, what they should do this winter? Should they just wear an extra blanket?
You're here. Minister.
The Scottish Government have been given a record settlement in the recent budget, and winter fuel payments and other benefits are devolved, as she knows, to the Scottish Government.
Rachel Musk.
Mr Speaker, I want to thank the residents of York for donating to my thermals collection on Saturday. However, I know that older people are going to really struggle this winter in the city of York. So can she say how many people have signed up across the country to the pension credit since July, and what additional steps will be taken to ensure that those that miss out on the 21st of December deadline will still be able to get support to keep warm this winter?
Minister.
Claims have more than doubled, so they've increased by 145% since late July, and we are working at pace to process those claims. We've deployed an additional 500 staff to make sure that those who are on the lowest incomes get the pension credit that they need.
We come to topicals. Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Mrs. Thank you. Question number 1, please, Mr Speaker.
Well done. Sarah State.
Mr Speaker, as a lifelong champion of family carers, dealing with the problem of carers allowance overpayments is a priority for me and my right honourable friend, the Minister for Social Security and Disability. Last week we set out the next steps in our independent review led by Liz Sayce, the former Chief Executive of Disability Rights UK. This will report by the summer, looking at how and why overpayments were built up, the changes we can make for the future, and how best to help those affected. Along with the biggest ever cash boost to the earnings threshold for carers allowance announced in the budget, this shows our determination to give family carers the support they need and deserve.
Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, over 23,000 people have lost their winter fuel allowance. That's over 90% of former claimants. So does the Minister think that it's fair that someone who has paid tax all of their working life will now be taxed on their state pension as well as losing their winter fuel allowance?
Good question. Sarah State.
The Honourable Lady talks about the winter fuel payment, and she fails to mention our determination to make sure the 880,000 pensioners who don't claim pension credit but should, so that they can get that winter fuel payment, or the £4.9 million household support fund allocation allocated to West Sussex, which covers her constituency, which can be used for precisely those pensioners just above the pension credit threshold who've worked hard all their lives but need extra support with the cost of heating.
Tom Rutland.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I welcome the review into the overpayment of carers' allowance, which will come as a huge relief to many people in East Worthing and Shoreham. Can the Secretary of State confirm that the Department will do everything it can to prevent family carers unnecessarily getting into debt in the future?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yes, I can confirm that. We do place a very high value on the contribution of family carers. The budget announcements that my right honourable friend referred to around the carers allowance earnings threshold will help avert inadvertent overpayments in the future, and also bring about 60,000 additional carers into eligibility for carers allowance. We are determined to do everything we can.
Shadow Secretary of State Helen Waitley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Secretary of State tell me how many people who should get the winter fuel payment will get it this winter?
We intend to ensure everybody who's entitled to the pension credit and therefore the winter fuel payment claim it and get it. We've seen a 145% increase in claims, far more than was ever achieved under the last government. And if she was so concerned about that, perhaps she should have taken action when she had 14 years in government.
Helen Waitley.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, she simply won't give a straight answer. She won't tell the House what she knows, just like she knew that their choices would push 100,000 pensioners into poverty, and she didn't tell the House that either. So let's try this question instead. The government's own figures show that pensioners applying now are going to have to wait until the spring to find out if they will get winter fuel money. So what's her advice to a pensioner sitting in the cold and wondering if they can afford to turn on their heating this Christmas?
If the Honourable Lady cared so much about pensioners in the cold, why did her government leave 880,000 not claiming pension credit? Why did she first promise to bring together the merger of housing benefit and pension credit in 2011 and never delivered? This government is taking action. 42,500 more people are receiving pension credit now than when she left government. We're determined to act. Perhaps she should apologise for her failure.
Tamanjeet Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Many of my more senior constituents are concerned about their finances and winter fuel payments, especially those just above the threshold. So with 1,688 households in Slough currently eligible for pension credit but not claiming this vital benefit, what steps is my honourable friend the Secretary of State taking to increase the uptake and ensure that those who are not eligible are not left out in the cold?
I'd like to place on record my thanks to the 160 local authorities who've worked with the DWP to raise awareness of applying for pension credit, and the various charities around the country who've worked with us too. We have seen a record number of people, a doubling of the number of people claiming pension credit, and we are processing those claims at pace.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Steve Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And a national audit report last week highlighted how cliff edges in the care allowance system has resulted in 136,000 people owing £250 million. In light of that, will the Minister ensure that we stop this injustice, stop the demands, until there is a fairer system introduced?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the NAO report, which I asked for as chair of the Work and Pension Select Committee last May. We are determined, as I've said earlier, to address the problem of carers allowance overpayments. The cliff edge could be dealt with by the introduction of a taper instead of the current arrangements. The Chancellor mentioned that in her budget speech in the autumn. If we do that, it won't happen quickly because it'll be quite a major project, but it is something we're looking at very closely.
Mr. Swallow.
Speaker, my constituent Gary has seen his real terms income fall because the pension he built up before 1997 in a defined benefit scheme is not subject to indexation, even though 80% of defined benefit schemes are in surplus. Will my right honourable friend ask the pensions regulator to look at this issue?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for representing the concerns of his constituent. My department is working closely with the pensions regulator, and we are currently looking to gather information on the number of schemes that provide discretionary increases on pre-1997 benefits and the number who do not. At the moment, those schemes have the discretion as to whether to decide to, the trustees of those schemes, as to whether to decide to index or not index those benefits.
Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Over the weekend, James Reed, Chief Executive of one of the largest recruiters in the UK, said that job figures are down, that vacancies are down by 26% compared to the same period last year, and that should be a red light warning that higher unemployment and recession is just around the corner. So will the Secretary of State plead with the Chancellor to reverse the jobs NI tax raid that is devastating employment figures before that red light warning becomes a reality?
Minister.
Thank the honourable gentleman for his question. We still have over 800,000 vacancies in this economy, and businesses are crying out for staff. That's why through our reform programme we are determined that the DWP will serve business better, and I look forward to working with members right across this House to make that happen.
Adam Jogi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, my constituent Andrew Price and Matthew Whitmore came to my surgery to share their anger and distress at their pensions being stolen by a so-called investment company. They are thousands of pounds out of pocket. So can I ask the Pensions Minister what protections are in place, and will she meet with me to discuss how my constituents can get their money back?
Minister.
I would be very happy to meet with him. Unfortunately, there are many of these cases in which people are preyed on by scammers, and I'd be happy to meet with him to discuss the case further.
So Desmond Swain.
So why did the OBR estimate that the budget would cost 50,000 jobs?
Minister.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the OBR report that says overall employment will go up.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How does the Secretary of State envision the future of job centres to look like in Scotland and in my constituency of Western Bartonshire, and what role will technology have to play in that?
Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his question? He is absolutely right to highlight that any reform to our job centres must come with digital transformation. We are currently exploring schemes such as a job centre in your pocket app, as well as looking for ways in which job seekers can self-serve in terms of meeting the conditions of their conditionality regime.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. December the 4th, my colleague, the Honourable Member for Murray West, Nern and Strathbay, asked the Prime Minister about waspy women and was told the government were working at pace. Since then, 1,400 or 1,500 more women have died without justice or compensation. Can the Minister tell us what working at pace means and give us a timeline for that, please?
I thank him for that question. I was the first minister for 8 years to meet with the WASPI campaigners to listen to their concerns. The Ombudsman took 6 years to investigate 6 cases. We are working at pace on this issue. We hope to come to the House soon, if you'll listen to my answer, to update him and the public on what we're going to do next.
Richard Quidley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Young people on supported housing, including my constituency of Isle of Wight West, effectively pay a marginal rate of tax of 55% on their universal credit when they start work, meaning earnings of just £133 a week see their housing benefit tapered to nil, meaning work doesn't pay. Would the Minister look at the economic benefits of reducing that taper and increasing the applicable amount, making sure that work does pay and improving housing security?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend raises a very important point. There is a problem in the interaction between the universal credit taper rate and the housing benefit taper for people in supported and temporary accommodation. And we are at the moment looking at options for how to tackle this quite serious work disincentive problem.
Paul Cullen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Christmas, over 1 in 4 children in this country will be living in poverty. This could be partly addressed by scrapping the 2-child benefit cap and paid for simply by reversing the Tory tax cut on the banks. So can I ask the Secretary of State, what's more important, hungry children or bankers' bonuses?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. He's right to raise the condition of children living in poverty in this country, and that's why, as I mentioned earlier in questions, the Child Poverty Task Force is doing extensive work on this issue.
It's Osmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to 2022 Migration Observatory report, over 200,000 children are likely to be families with no recourse to public funds, NRPF. As the 2022 Work and Pensions Committee report highlighted, these families face particularly tough circumstances without access to benefits. Can the Minister confirm whether the Child Poverty Task Force is engaging directly with affected families to understand the challenges they are facing?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable lady for her question, my honourable friend. The Child Poverty Task Force is considering all children across the UK in all aspects of our child poverty strategy, and we recognise the distinct challenges of poverty faced by children in particular groups such as migrant children, disabled children and others, and we are engaging directly with families affected by poverty. We recognise that the causes of child poverty are deep-rooted and we'll look at all levers to make change.
Madam Maguire.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Within Epsom Muirs, local charities like the Sunnybank Trust are seeing a lack of employment opportunities for people with learning disabilities. In fact, only 6.9% of people with learning disabilities are currently in paid work. What measures is the DWP taking to support employers to help individuals with learning disabilities to get into work?
Minister.
Well, the honourable member raises a very important point. She'll probably be aware of the Buckland review published before the election, looking specifically at employment support for people with autism. My honourable friend and I met Sir Robert Buckland recently, and we are looking at how we can take forward the ideas that he proposed in his report.
Chair of the Select Committee, Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, a recently published FOI report indicates that AI tools used to detect DWP fraud are biased and disproportionately discriminate against people by age, disability, marital status and nationality, and obviously this has caused considerable concern. What assurances can my right honourable friend give that the procurement and use of such tools will be covered by strict governance standards, including tests for fairness?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. She will know that we face a significant challenge with fraud and error costing the Department almost £10 billion a year, and it is right that we look to utilise all available tools to tackle it. However, I understand her concerns, though I would remind her that the final decision on whether someone receives a welfare payment is always made by a human. That is the most robust safeguard that we can have in place, although it sits alongside, of course, a broader suite.
Alfred Brandreth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My inspirational constituent, Bells Lewis, has terminal bowel cancer. When she was first undergoing treatment, she was initially turned down for PIP, despite the significant impact on her ability to work and carry out basic daily activities. Has the Minister considered incorporating clinical diagnosis alongside function and eligibility assessments? And will the Minister meet with Bells to discuss the assessment process?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, we do keep the assessment process under review. I'd be very happy to look at the details of this particular case and perhaps meet with her and her constituent if that would be helpful.
Final question, Sally James.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. An astonishing £35 billion has been lost to benefit fraud and error since the pandemic. So can my right honourable friend outline the plans and the timeline for recouping this money?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the scale of the enormous cost to the department in fraud of upwards of £35 billion since the pandemic. She will be pleased to know that the fraud, error and debt bill is due to come before the House early in the new year. This side of the House is serious about tackling fraud. It's just a shame we inherited the mess we did.
That completes questions. Before I come to the urgent question, I'd like to make a short statement. The House of Commons respects the jurisdiction of the courts, for example, in our sub judice rule. The sub judice rule applies to all criminal cases, including cases involving espionage, which are currently before the courts. It is important that nothing we say should prejudice a fair trial before a jury. The sub judice rule applies to the majority of civil cases. However, the sub judice rule does not apply where a ministerial decision is in question, such as the decision in the case by the Home Secretary to exclude the person known as H6 from the UK on the basis that his exclusion is conducive to public good on grounds of national security. For information, I understand that this afternoon the Administrative Court has decided to lift the anonymity. The government is responsible to this House, which holds ministers accountable for what is done on their authority. While it's important that members should be able to question ministers, I will remind them that the rules set out in Erskine May, paras 21.20 and 21.23, that it is only in order to criticise the conduct of a member of the royal family when debating a substantive motion drawn up in proper terms, which it is not in this urgent question. So I hope the House has got a feel for how we're going to debate this. I now call Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Speaker, to ask the Government if they will make a statement on the extent of United Front Work Department operations within the UK.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the first duty of any government is national security, so we welcome the Court's decision to uphold the Home Office's position in regard to the exclusion of H6, who can now be named as Yang Tengbo. The Special Immigration Appeals Commission concluded that there was a basis for the conclusion that H6 had been in a position to generate relationships with prominent UK figures which could be leveraged for political interference purposes by the Chinese Communist Party, including the United Front Work Department and the Chinese state. Mr. Speaker, where there are individuals who pose a threat to our national security, we are absolutely committed to using the full range of powers available to disrupt them. Where we encounter foreign interference or espionage, whether this stems from the United Front Work Department or any other state-linked actor, we will be swift in using all available tools, including prosecutions, exclusions, sanctions and diplomacy in order to keep our country safe. Now, given the potential for further litigation, it would not be appropriate for me to say any more. But it is important to recognise that this case does not exist in a vacuum. As the Director-General of MI5 made clear in October, we are in the most complex threat environment he has ever seen. Alongside the threat from terrorism, we face ongoing efforts by a number of states, including China, Russia and Iran, to harm the UK's security. Our response is amongst the most robust and sophisticated anywhere in the world. Now, the National Security Act of 2023, which was supported by members on all sides of the House and which strengthened our powers to protect the UK, is central to our protection against those states who seek to conduct hostile acts. To date, there have been 6 individuals charged under this new act, and the government has been working hard on the rollout of a crucial part of the National Security Act, the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, or FIRS. We will say more about this soon, but we intend to lay regulations in the new year and commence the scheme in the summer. The government has also set out our approach to China. It will be consistent and strategic. We will challenge where we must in order to keep our country safe, compete where we need to, and cooperate where we can, for example, on matters like climate change. That is acting in the national interest, and the Prime Minister reiterated this earlier today. However, Mr. Speaker, the breadth of the threats we face from foreign states are pernicious and complex, and the work of our intelligence agencies is unrivalled in mitigating them. And I want to take this opportunity today to pay tribute to them and to the amazing work that they do to keep our country safe. Today, as ever, they will be pursuing those who wish to do us harm, including those from foreign states. We support them now and always in these efforts, and they will know that at any point when the UK's national security is at risk, we will not hesitate to use every tool at our disposal to keep our country safe.
Can I just say, there's 2 things I want to just put on the record. It would have been easier for the government to come with a statement. Obviously, there was more to say than the allocated time. And I'll say to Sir Ian, please don't tell the media what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and trying to bounce the chair into making that decision. If anybody else had put in, I would have given it to them on the basis that I'm not playing the tune through the media. But I would say to the government it would be helpful if they came forward with statements rather than being dragged to the counter here as well. So please, hopefully we can all learn from that. And here's a good example how it will be done. Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I apologise if that was the case. Can I just say that Yang Tengbo at H6 was in fact not a lone wolf. He was one of some 40,000 members of the United Works Department, which the Intelligence Security Committee report last year said, and I quote, "and known to government, had penetrated every sector of the UK economy, spying, stealing intellectual property, influencing and shaping our institutions. We don't know that our agents now are frustrated by lack of action, as they say, but they don't seem to have the tools they need to deal with this, and one of those tools is staring us in the face." So will the government commit to putting China now in the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, and will they do it now? No more delay. There is no need for delay. The Interparliamentary Alliance on China, IPAC, found that H6, Tengbo, has already been well known as a United Front member and is known to others who are already now deep in the political establishment. Parliamentarians are exposed to the United Front as well on a regular basis. So will the Minister remedy that today and accept now that China is our most prominent security threat and all action must take priority? My right honourable friend, the member for Tunbridge and Westmoreland, the previous Security Minister, said publicly that the Department was ready to name China in the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, would have forced United Front members like H6 to register or face serious consequences. So given that, and that it is available to do, why have we not done it yet? And is it true, as being reported by some papers, the Times included, that the government is now under pressure behind the scenes from banks and the wider business community, and including government departments, not to do it? And when it comes to a member of the royal family, I simply say this: how was it that somebody who was known to the Security Committee, to the security forces, was allowed to get so close to a member of the royal family without proper scrutiny exposing them? Finally, I note today that the Prime Minister said, in response to this issue, he quotes, we will cooperate where we can, particularly on environmental issues, and challenge where we must, particularly on human rights issues. But I finish with this. If the Prime Minister means this, then why are we still buying huge numbers of solar arrays from China made demonstrably using slave labour? Surely this statement is clearly incorrect. Far from challenging China on human rights, it now appears we are turning a blind eye to them. Why is that?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me firstly come to the points the right honourable gentleman made about FIRS. Because upon our arrival in government, we found that FIRS was not ready to be implemented, as has been claimed. And since coming into office, we have ensured that there are now more people than ever working on FIRS implementation. The case management team have been recruited and are now in place. As I said earlier on in my opening remarks, we plan to lay the regulations that underpin the scheme early in the new year, ahead of the scheme going live in the summer. And as we've previously committed, we will provide 3 months' notice of the scheme go-live date to enable all of those who will be affected by it adequate time to prepare. Now, I think it's also worth me making the point, Mr. Speaker, that the scheme will be underpinned by an IT solution consisting of a registration platform, a case management system, and an online public register. The IT programme developed under the previous government was not ready for the scheme to go live, and plans were not sufficiently robust. This government has progressed at pace the work to ensure that we are in a position to launch FIRS with the laying of the regulations in the new year with a view to the scheme going live in the summer. I also say to the right honourable gentleman that work is underway to identify which foreign powers will be placed on the enhanced tier. That will be based on robust security and intelligence analysis. The Home Secretary and I plan to begin setting out the government's approach to the use of the enhanced tier in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first duty of government is national security, and the threat that the country faces is the most complex and evolving we have ever seen. Given the range of threats we face from hostile state actors, it is important the government takes action to protect our critical national infrastructure from cyber attacks and ransomware attacks. Can the Minister update us on the plans announced in the King's speech for a new bill on cyber resilience and other actions to improve protections in this area?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. I think he makes a very important point. We are working at pace with colleagues across government, including in the FCDO and in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, to progress these matters. There is a lot of work going on across government to ensure that we are resilient as we possibly can to the threats that we face from a range of actors. But he can be assured, as can the House, that this government will use all necessary measures to protect our security and ensure that our critical national infrastructure is as resilient as it possibly can be.
Secretary of State Chris Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by thanking the Security Minister and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster for the security briefing they arranged earlier today for the Shadow Foreign Secretary and I. We are grateful for his assistance. Mr. Speaker, Chinese infiltration of public organisations is of grave concern, but it's not just public organisations such as government, it's also businesses and universities that are being systemically infiltrated. And often intellectual property theft is at the heart of what the Chinese government are trying to achieve. When I was Technology Minister, I saw this in areas like artificial intelligence, quantum computing and others. And I think intellectual property theft of cutting-edge technology is something I would like to hear the Security Minister talk a little about in a moment. Mr. Speaker, last year the head of MI5, Ken McCallum, said that Chinese activity seeking to infiltrate our institutions is, and I quote, on an epic scale. Last year there were multiple attempts by Chinese companies to get hold of sensitive technology, and MI5 estimate that 20,000 individuals have been approached by Chinese agents who are trying to influence them or forge contacts in some way. And it's likely that at some point, either in the past or in the future, every member of this House will be contacted or attempted to be contacted in one form or another. Now, Mr. Speaker, the opposition will fully support the government in working to secure our nation's safety. But in that spirit, I would just ask one or two questions. Firstly, would he consider expediting the implementation of the foreign influence registration scheme that he referred to? And can I echo my right honourable friend, the member for Chingford and Woodford Green's suggestion that China is placed in the enhanced tier of that? Secondly, will the Security Minister review the wisdom of the government's approach to China? I think given what we've learnt and what we know, these very close relations that the Prime Minister is apparently attempting may not be wise, and the rather sycophantic tone the Prime Minister took with President Xi at the G20 a few weeks ago may not be very wise in light of what we now know. So, Mr. Speaker, Chinese infiltration and intellectual property theft is a very grave concern, and I would welcome some further comments on the Security Minister as to what he will do to combat that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, can I say to the Shadow Home Secretary that we were pleased to offer the briefing, because these are important matters that should not divide us. So it will always be the approach of this government that where we can work cooperatively with all members of this House on matters relating to national security, then we will seek to do so. I think he made some important points about matters relating to business and to higher education, to universities. And as a former technology minister, I know that he speaks with authority and expertise specifically on matters relating to intellectual property theft. And that is an important point for him to make. And I completely share the concerns. It's completely unacceptable that any entity, whether they be a hostile state or other, seeks to draw intellectual property out of our country. And that is a matter that this government takes very seriously. He made the point about the comments of the Director General MI5, Ken McCallum. I would say to him that the National Security and Investment Act provides a framework for this government, as it did for the previous government, with dealing some of these matters. And in terms of the specific questions he raised, he asked me again about FERS. I hope I've been able to provide some reassurance in terms of the government's intention to lay the regulations as soon as practically possible in the new year, with a view to having the scheme up and running by the summer. In terms of the approach to China, I don't agree with his characterisation of the Prime Minister's recent meeting, and I would just say very gently to him, at least he didn't take him to the pub for a pint.
Neil Coyle.
Yeah, will the broader China audit include an assessment of the number of Chinese Communist Party operatives working in the UK, including through bodies like the HKETO? And will the Minister ensure everyone targeted, whether members of this place, members of the royal family, or members of the public with British national overseas status originally from Hong Kong, have access to tailored security support?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, in terms of the audit, we are working with other government departments to carry out an audit of the UK's relationship with China. And that is being done to improve our ability to understand and respond to both the challenges and the opportunities that China poses. It is vital that we have a thorough understanding of the bilateral relationship with China, including where we need to challenge to protect the UK's national security. The audit is ongoing. Its outcomes will guide a consistent and coherent approach to China. In terms of British national overseas, this is a matter which I know that the Honourable Gentleman has pursued rightly for some significant amount of time. And this reflects the UK's historic and moral commitment to those people of Hong Kong who chose to retain their ties to the UK by taking up the BNO status at the point of Hong Kong's handover to China in 1997. BNO status holders and their families are making significant contributions to our economy and local communities. And from its introduction on the 31st of January 2021 to the end of September 2024, over 215,000 visas were granted on the route.
The Real Democrat spokesperson, Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Member for bringing this urgent question on what is a crucially important question for us all in this place, because we are looking for robust action from this government to keep our politics and democracy safe from the influence of foreign governments. And we shouldn't pretend for a moment that the case of H6 is in any way unique or unusual, because, as we've heard, the MI5 Director General Ken McCallum has warned that bodies like the UFWD are mounting patient, well-funded, deceptive campaigns to buy and exert influence. We see it in our business world, we see it in our universities. And in my constituency of Edinburgh West, where we have the Chinese consulate, I have on more than one occasion been personally chastised by the consul for expressing my views about the Uyghur Muslims or speaking up for the Hong Kong residents in this country. So it is a serious problem. In fact, I was filmed once by a mysterious drone speaking at a Hong Kong protest. But we need that robust action to clamp down on things like the police stations, which we have heard about existing in this country. So as the government at the moment is saying that it is seeking closer relationships with China, how can the Minister reassure us that the government will not weaken its stance, will not weaken its robustness against Chinese influence in this country, or on human rights, democracy in Taiwan and Hong Kong, and protect us all from this insidious approach?
Thank you. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her question and her remarks. I can assure her that this government is and will be taking the robust action that is required to combat the nature of the threat that she rightly characterised. She's right to say that the particular circumstances of the case that we're discussing today is not unique, and there is a much wider threat that the government is working with the intelligence agencies and with partners to combat. I think she will understand that on matters relating to China, the government does have to weigh a number of considerations. And whilst, of course, national security will always be the sort of primary responsibility and is the thing that we take most seriously, there is, and there would have been for the previous government, of course, a requirement to look for areas where we can cooperate. So the truth of the matter is we have to balance that relationship, but I can absolutely give her an assurance that we will take the robust action that is required, including through the Defending Democracy Task Force, which is a very useful mechanism that we use across government to look more closely at these matters.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think members on all sides of this House are right to raise concerns about security threats we face from China and any attempts to undermine or infiltrate our institutions. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of all of us, Can I ask the Minister to pass on his thanks to all of those who work in the security services for the vital work that they do to most of us that will never know or never see, but which is constantly protecting us from those threats?
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for making that point. By necessity, of course, the work that our intelligence services does is in the shadows. But I have to say, since coming into this particular role a number of months ago, I've been extremely impressed by the professionalism and the dedication of those men and women who work incredibly hard to keep our country safe. We all, across this House and across the country, owe them a debt of gratitude, and I will absolutely make sure that that is passed on to them.
Chair of the Select Committee, Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I urge the Minister to introduce the first scheme as soon as possible and commence it at the earliest possible opportunity? And can I ask him what steps the Home Office is taking to ensure that the proposed new Chinese embassy in the Royal Mint site has proper oversight, and that we do not allow it to become a new base for spies?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee for her questions, and I know that the Home Secretary looks forward to appearing in front of her committee tomorrow. She mentioned the embassy. I think she probably will know that the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government has called in the application in line with current planning policy. The planning decision sits solely with the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, the Deputy Prime Minister, and of course she will understand that I'm not able to say anything more about that, but a final decision will be made in due course. She also asked about FIRS. I can give her an assurance that we are progressing FIRS at pace. It is the government's strong intention to introduce FIRS as soon as practically possible, and to that end we intend to lay the regulations as soon as possible in the new year.
What?
The Home Secretary referred to sycophancy towards the Chinese. I think that charge is better directed at his own side. It's less than 5 years since Theresa May went to Beijing, and she was praised by the state media on that trip, and I know this because I was on that trip in a former career. She was praised for, quote, sidestepping human rights issues in the furtherance of the wider necessities of the trip. Does the Security Minister agree with me that that's not the right approach for the Chinese?
Mr. Speaker, I do agree. I don't think that that is the right approach. I think the current government's approach is the right one. I've laid out the strategic approach that we intend to adopt with China. We have to be clear-headed about the nature of the threat that we face, but of course we also have to look for areas where we can cooperate as well.
Thank you, Mr.
Speaker. Last year as Home Secretary I made the decision to exclude Yang Tengbo from the UK because his presence posed a threat to our national security. That decision was based on the advice of MI5, and I'm very pleased that the High Court has upheld that decision. I say this gently to the Minister, but isn't it regrettable that it's taken a high-profile case, public outcry and opposition MPs dragging the Minister to the Chamber to finally get the government to commit to implementing the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, a scheme that we enacted and that was ready to go at the time of the general election. Given the unprecedented threat posed by China, malicious cyber attacks, transnational repression, the Confucius Institutes, Chinese police stations, and of course the human rights abuses of the Uyghur Muslims, if the government's really serious about tackling the Chinese threat, when will it list China on the enhanced tier?
Well, I wasn't going to make this point, but given the Right Honourable Lady has made her point in the way that she has, I will just gently point out that the previous government had a significant period of time from the passing of the national security. Well, the Right Honourable Lady shakes her head. It is a statement of fact to say that the previous government had a significant amount of time, many months, from the passing of the National Security Act, where they could have chosen to implement the first scheme. They didn't implement the first scheme. It now falls to this government to do so, and that is precisely what we will do.
Dan Aldridge.
Mr. Speaker, it's disappointing
Pointing that some members opposite are trying to turn what should be a moment of collective unity in the face of a shared security threat into a political row instead. Does the Security Minister agree with me? It is pretty incredible for the party whose Defence Secretary was sacked for leaking vital intelligence information about the Huawei 5G contract to now pose as the protector of our country's national security.
Well, I'm grateful to him and I agree. The approach of this government will always be to work constructively across the House on matters relating to national security. But given the record of certain right honourable and honourable members opposite, I suggest perhaps humility might be the order of the day for some of them.
Tom Tugendar.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. Look, I don't want to go over this readiness of the first scheme again and again. I just leave it that I was assured by the same officials who sit in the box advising him that it was ready to go by the end of the year. Clearly the advice has changed. There's only one thing in the department that's changed, and that's the party leading it, so I can only assume that there's a change of intent. But I'm delighted that it will be ready to go by the summer, better late than never. The real question, of course, is whether it'll be worth having, and the advice from MI5 was very, very clear. If China isn't in the enhanced tier, it's not worth having. Will China be in that tier?
Thank you. Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman. He knows that I take these matters incredibly seriously. He and I have known each other for a very long time, and therefore I know that he will take on trust my assertion to him and to the House that the scheme wasn't ready to go when we arrived in government in July of this year. We are working at pace. I've given a time frame for the House today, and I've also said that we're looking very carefully, very closely, working with colleagues across government to look at how we can best structure the scheme, and we'll make the announcements in the normal way in due course.
Joe Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One weak point in protecting our parliamentary democracy from hostile state actors is money in politics. Does the Security Minister agree with me that this latest case shows it's a priority to ensure our electoral laws are robust enough to ensure that only funds that are clean and sourced entirely from within the UK fund our political parties, because there seems to be some confusion, certainly from some of the parties opposite?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the honourable gentleman makes a very important point, and I know that he speaks with great authority on this matter. He will know very well that we've just appointed Baroness Hodge as the government's new anti-corruption champion, and she will be supporting the work that we do, looking very carefully at the impact that money, dirty money, has on politics. And he's absolutely right. This government will want to assure itself that the electoral laws that govern the conduct of elections are robust and ensure that there are not opportunities for people from overseas who seek to intervene in our political processes. It is a matter and advice that I think should be taken very seriously by all parties across this House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my Wimbledon constituency, there are many Hong Kongers deeply concerned about surveillance from Chinese agents in this country. Is the Minister able to give my constituents any assurance that their legitimate fears are being addressed by this government?
I'm grateful to him for raising the plight of his constituents. Yes, I am able to give him those assurances. The government takes the kind of interventions that he's referred to very, very seriously. Through the Defending Democracy Task Force, we are looking very carefully at the issue of transnational repression, and we will have more to say about it in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Minister about the integrity of our democracy? And in particular, can I ask what steps he's taking to ensure the integrity of the processes and institutions of our political process, especially, but not only, with regards to China?
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman makes a very important point. I mentioned briefly earlier on the importance that this government attaches to the Defending Democracy Task Force. This was a body that we inherited from the previous government. We are working at pace to ensure that it works as effectively across government as it possibly can. And fundamentally, it seeks to address the point he has made about challenging those threats to the integrity of our democracy. This government will ensure that no stone is left unturned in seeking to address these very significant challenges that we all know that we face.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Mr. Speaker, just a few days ago, the head of MI5 talked about having to make uncomfortable choices and he talked about paring back counter-terrorism operations in order to deal with the huge rise in state threats. Now, if the government means what it says about security being the first priority of the government, will he undertake to make sure MI5 and the security services as a whole have the resources they need to tackle all the threats? And by all means, blame the previous government for the state we're in, but it won't get him very far because I need him to answer that question.
I think the right honourable gentleman makes a fair point and a good challenge. And I can give him an assurance that the Home Secretary and I work incredibly closely with MI5 and with colleagues across government to make sure that they have the resources they need to do the very difficult job that they do. I mentioned the remarks that Ken McCallum had made in his annual threat lecture back in October. The nature of the threat that we face is more challenging, more complex than at any point during our lifetimes. That does require resource and it requires an expertise, and the Home Secretary, myself as Security Minister, and all of the government will work to make sure that our security services have the resources they need to do the job.
Boris Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful for this urgent question, and I thank the Minister for what he said, in particular about the Defending Democracy Task Force. But I wonder if the Minister can assure me as well that not only will the government do all it can to secure our national security, but that with respect to the activities of individuals with known links to the Chinese government and who are considered to be a national security risk, that the fullest of investigations will be done in order to ensure the integrity of our national security.
Mr. Speaker, I can give the honourable member that assurance.
Chris Law.
Mr. Speaker, the United Front Work Department has said there are 40,000 members globally, and Mr. Yang Tengbo is surely the tip of the iceberg in the UK. They're not only tasked with cultivating relationships with high-level figures that extending influence of British nationals, but in all walks of society. That means the public need to be much more aware of the risk to themselves. So I wanted to ask very specifically, what is the Minister doing to assess the numbers of members in our society, and what public awareness campaign are you going to make for my constituents of Dundee and also across these islands?
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member makes an important point about public awareness, and I will take that away and give it further consideration. But with regard to the remarks that he made at the beginning, I think what he has done essentially is underline the importance of why we do need the first scheme. As I've said a number of times before, the government are committed to implementing the scheme. We're getting on and we will implement it in the new year.
Todd Slinger.
Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the somewhat chiding tone of some of the comments from honourable members opposite, does the Security Minister agree with me that it is actually possible to both maintain a consistent and long-term relationship with China, as we must, but also to take the robust measures that he has set out today to defend our national interests?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do agree with the honourable gentleman, and that is the challenge for any government, regardless of political stripe. Yes, of course, national security is the priority, and we have to defend against the threats that we face. But we also have to cooperate economically, and this government will seek to balance those two responsibilities.
Mr. Speaker, the Security Minister mentions the breadth of the national security threat against the United Kingdom. He mentions Russia, he mentions China, he mentions Iran, but unless I missed it, he didn't mention North Korea, and I wonder whether you make a comment on that. And following on from the my right honourable friend, the member for Harwich and North Essex, on the issue of resources, is the Minister confident that the UK intelligence community across the agencies has sufficient resources to manage the increased threat that he has recognised in this chamber today?
The right honourable gentleman, I know, speaks with real experience and authority on these matters, and he's right to raise the issue of North Korea. In terms of the point he made about resources, I'm not remotely complacent about this at all. Mindful of the nature of the threat that we face, the Home Secretary and I will work with our colleagues across government to ensure that our security services do have the resources they need. We have exceptional people stepping forward to serve, and it is the responsibility of government, regardless of political colour, to ensure that they have the resources, the technology that they need, not just to keep pace with the threat, but to retain a competitive advantage, and we will make sure that they have the resources to do that.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yang Tengbo is the alleged Chinese spy who's been stalking the corridors of power in our country and rubbing shoulders with royalty, prime ministers and business leaders. Yet his name has been withheld from the great British public. Does the Minister agree with me that it was only withheld to avoid embarrassment of previous prime ministers, business leaders, and was not in the best interests of the British public?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure the honourable member will acknowledge that I named H6, the individual, that the reason for his initial anonymity was as a result of a court order and was not a decision by the UK government.
Sir Alex Shelbrooke, no less.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the West certainly learnt a lesson when Russia invaded about energy supplies and where it comes from. And I just want to press the Minister, building on what my right honourable friend for Chingford and Woodford Green said about solar and about renewables, because we are pushing forward in this country, or the government is, with an agenda of pushing quickly towards renewable energy, and yet China manufacture and process a lot of the materials we need. So can I ask the Minister that before we accelerate towards that a full assessment is done on the risks that could happen to our energy supply, because that is a crucial piece of our national security.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm genuinely grateful for the points that the honourable member has just made. I think he makes some reasonable and constructive points, and of course we will consider them further. I mean, I would say to him, and I know that he will acknowledge this, that there are difficult judgments that have to be made by government about these matters, but I can give him an assurance that we will look at these matters with a clear-headed view about what is in the national interest of our country. But in the end, national security will always prevail.
Speaker, would the Minister agree that it's not just the big schemes that need looking at, it's the small ones too? Elite capture can happen at higher education level and infrastructure level too. Peking University HSBC Business School in Oxford wants to expand. The local planning authority narrowly passed it, and I asked for the last government to call it in. Last week, this government has approved the scheme. This is a mistake. The economic benefit is going to be going to the Chinese Communist Party primarily. So will his department have a word with MHCLG, look at this scheme again, but also what resilience is he offering to local planning authorities on these matters?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for the points that she makes. She's right, it isn't just about the bigger schemes, the smaller schemes are important as well. I think the matter that she referred to essentially was a planning matter, but I will have a look at it further. And in terms of matters relating to higher education, we work closely with colleagues in the Department for Education, and there are mechanisms in place across government where there are concerns that are expressed. We will follow them up.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I acknowledge the transformation in the security threat that's facing this country, and I urge the government to move forward as quickly as they can with the implementation of the FIRST scheme. But I draw the Minister's attention to the website of the US Department of the Treasury, which today gave a readout of the 7th meeting of the Financial Working Group between the US and the People's Republic of China, where an MOU was set out of those discussions in Nanjing. Can I say to the Minister that though it is very uncomfortable, he does everything he can to ensure that we do have a sophisticated relationship with China, and as uncomfortable as it may be, in order to preserve global and financial stability, we need to maintain that relationship in that domain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman, as he always does, has made a very sensible point. I can say to him I haven't yet looked at the US Treasury Department website, but I will look at it and give him an undertaking to report back on it later today. He's right about the sophisticated relationship as he describes it. I can say to him, as someone who knows government well, that these are matters that we take incredibly seriously, and that the National Security Council provides the forum for decision-making across government. A lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of political leadership now goes into ensuring that that is an appropriate forum where collectively we make decisions across government. Some of the decisions are not easy, some of them are more challenging, but we will always seek to do what is in the best interests of our country.
Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has recently put on hold the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act passed last year. Does he feel that that has helped or hindered the work of United Front in our universities, particularly our elite institutions?
I think the right honourable gentleman makes a fair point, and I'm very happy to discuss it with him offline. I mean, I look carefully at the suggestion that he has made. I know that it is being considered by colleagues across government, but let me take it away and I'll come back to him.
David Chadwick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. China is clearly trying to infiltrate all areas of UK society. Will the Minister outline what meetings he's having with the Department for Business and Trade to ensure the UK is more economically resilient by strengthening foreign direct investment screening and cyber defences, including a particular focus on increased data transparency requirements?
The honourable member makes an important point, and I can give him the assurance that we are working collaboratively across government, working with colleagues in the Business and Trade Department, but also in the Cabinet Office. I think he mentioned cyber as well. I mean, I can say to him that that is something that we take incredibly seriously. I was recently at the NCSC. They're doing extraordinary work, working with other partners across government, and we are cooperating closely with other government departments, including DCIT, and we are looking at what more we can do to combat that particular threat.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister assure the House that Chinese investments in the UK are properly scrutinised, particularly those that may be used to acquire leverage over UK policy?
Yes, I can give that assurance.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The original question actually asked about the extent of the United Front Works Department's operations within the United Kingdom. Can I ask the Minister for his assessment and engagement of the work of that department, either with or within the devolved administrations?
The honourable member makes an important point. In terms of the nature of the threat, I'd refer him back to the annual threat lecture that the Director General of MI5 gave back in October. But in terms of the devolved administrations, we work incredibly closely with all of them, and I hope at some point to be visiting his part of the world.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his answers? And the Minister will be aware that I, along with others in this chamber, have spoken on numerous occasions of the feelings of my British passport holders and those of Chinese origin who are my constituents, and the impression that they have in the threats of the Chinese Communist Party. The issues that the Minister has raised are not surprising, but they do remain concerning. So does the Minister agree that inaction is not an option? And how can the Minister provide the security to Chinese nationalists who are British citizens about their safety and security? Those who I've had to report to the PSNN, the part because I was concerned for their safety as they live their lives in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman has been very consistent in raising this matter previously. Let me give him an absolute assurance that foreign intervention, wherever it comes from, is completely unacceptable, and this government will use all tools at our disposal to combat it. We use the mechanism of the Defending Democracy Task Force, and there is a lot of work going on to look at the issue of transnational repression. So I can assure the honourable member that we take these matters very seriously. But if he has specific concerns that you want to raise with me, I'm always happy to discuss them with him.
Right, that completes the urgent question. We'll let the front benches change over. Right, we now come to the statement. Minister Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to make a statement on the publication of the Government's English Devolution White Paper. Mr. Speaker, this Government was elected on the promise of change, and we are determined to transform our economy, our country, through a decade of reform and national renewal that reverses the chaos and decline we inherited. Rebuilding Britain from the ground up so that it works for working people, with a mission-led plan for change that unlocks growth and raises living standards in every region, delivering new homes, jobs and opportunities for all, by matching investment with reform to improve local services and to maximise the impact of every penny we spend. Mr. Speaker, the British people deserve an economy that works for the whole country, with control over things that matter to them, which is why we're moving power out of Westminster and putting it back into the hands of those who know their areas best. The white paper we published today sets out the means by which we want to achieve this, backed up by our landmark English devolution bill, which will finally redress the imbalance of power between this place and communities up and down the country. And Mr. Speaker, this change cannot be delivered soon enough, because for all the promises of levelling up, after 14 years, our nations remain economically divided, with living standards in many parts of the country stagnating. We have an economy that hoards potential, and we have a politics that hoards power. As a former councillor and council leader, I have seen the difference that local leadership can make, and in such an immediate and a tangible way. But I also recognise the frustration that local leaders face in delivering the change that their areas need. In fact, it mirrors the frustration local people feel in being able to affect change in their neighbourhoods and on their high streets. And it hits at the heart of what it means to live a decent life, with pride of place and security, a right too often denied in the places where it's needed the most. Which is why this government is determined to end the top-down approach to decision-making in this country and replace it with a principle of partnership. The last Labour government began the process of change by creating the London Mayor, the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Senate and the Northern Ireland Assembly. And I have seen the transformational impact of empowered local leadership in Greater Manchester when, in 2014, now a decade ago, I was one of the local council leaders who worked in cooperation to agree the first English devolution agreement outside of London, an agreement that created the combined authority which has delivered genuine change under the leadership of an elected mayor working hand in glove with local leaders. Now, crucially, none of the now 12 strong mayors would claim that they do this alone. Whether it's attracting investment in clean carbon, renewable energy investment, growing digital and creative industries, bringing buses back under public control, tackling violence against women and girls, all would point to solid local partnerships and the importance of local government in delivering that change. But the truth in England is that the process of devolution remains unfinished, which is why we're introducing the measures before you today to finally get the job done.